This week on the 80's Emporium, Jessica takes a look at alien, ghost, and slasher movies. Also, find out what unlikely company tried to buy the rights to A Nightmare on Elm Street, and which famous entertainer almost starred as Beetlejuice. The answers
make horror fun.
Don't ghost us. The 80's Emporium starts now!
Ladies and boogeymen, boys and ghouls, I'm Jessica Rothard, and welcome to the 80's Emporium, your home and haunted house for everything 80's. The air is getting colder, the days are getting shorter, and pumpkin spice is in a good 60% of the food options, and that can only mean one thing. My ex is back in town. Just kidding. I hope. Halloween is quickly approaching, which means that we are in the season for costumes, candies, tricks, and treats. And of course, horror movies. The horror genre is far from dead, but looking back, different types of horror movies seem to gain popularity at different points in time. For example, the 1970s were obsessed with religious horror, the 60s were wild for Vincent Price, and the 50s loved giant bug movies. But in the 1980s, we experienced a horror renaissance, a new fascination with the macabre not seen since the golden age of the Universal monsters in the 1930s and 40s. We managed to unearth 6 horror subgenres that not only grew in popularity in the 80s, but experienced a complete rebirth. In 1979, future Oscar-winning filmmaker Ridley Scott directed a new type of space film where aliens are the enemy and no one can hear you scream. Alien, a slasher film set in space, was something that was new and fresh for audiences of the era. And instead of a man in the leading role, as was the norm, he cast a woman, an unknown actress named Sigourney Weaver. 7 years later, director James Cameron took over the reins and, along with a returning Sigourney Weaver, brought us Aliens, a film that was so successful that Empire magazine christened it the greatest film sequel of all time. The film was nominated for 7 Academy Awards, including one for Weaver, which was considered a landmark nomination within sci-fi film history. John Carpenter makes his first of many appearances on this list with arguably his best film. Based on 1951's The Thing from Another World, the film tells of a group of researchers in Antarctica who encounter a murderous alien that can imitate other living organisms. Which is crazy, because I didn't know my ex moved there. While the characters are supposed to be in Antarctica, in reality, much of the thing was filmed on a refrigerated soundstage in Los Angeles, where the outdoor temperature clocked in at over 100 degrees. While E.T. the Extra-Terrrestrial does have a scary introduction, we soon learn that this visitor from another planet is nothing to be afraid of. In fact, Columbia passed on the film because they didn't think it was scary enough to be successful. E.T., which was picked up by Universal, ended up as the highest-grossing film of all time to that point, with $619 million. It would not be surpassed until Spielberg topped himself with Jurassic Park. After Rocky IV, people joked that Rocky Balboa would soon run out of human opponents and he would have to fight an alien. That joke would inspire Predator, a film that kicked off a decades-long man versus alien action franchise. Starring Arnold Schwarzenegger and directed by famed action director John McTiernan, Predator initially received mostly negative reviews from critics, but is now regarded as one of the greatest action movies of all time.
You son of a bitch!
The cult classic Killer Klowns from Outer Space is about, well, you guessed it. While most of the alien horror movies of the 80s are about aliens or humans accidentally running into each other, these space creatures come to Earth with one mission: to capture and eat humans.
We would have to be total morons to believe this clown invasion crap.
As to why the aliens look and act like clowns is anyone's guess. By the way, if you're enjoying this video, do us a huge favor and hit the subscribe button and click the notification bell to be the first to know when we post new content. Even though it technically takes place at a hotel, The Shining is the gold standard for the haunted house movie. But like many classics, it was not beloved upon its release. Even with a star like Jack Nicholson and a film master like Kubrick, the film was panned by author Stephen King and even received multiple nominations at the Golden Raspberry Awards. but the film has since become one of the most celebrated horror movies of all time. Even though it was released in 1990, we can't talk about ghost movies without mentioning one with some of our favorite 80s stars. Featuring Patrick Swayze, Demi Moore, and Whoopi Goldberg, who won an Oscar for her role in the film, Ghost was a massive hit, grossing over $500 million and receiving 5 Academy Award nominations. The success of the film made Demi Moore the highest paid actress in Hollywood, and rekindled a love of pottery making for audiences everywhere.
Hello, Ghostbusters. Yes, of course they're serious.
Originally conceived as a vehicle for John Belushi, Eddie Murphy, and Dan Aykroyd, the lead role would eventually fall to Bill Murray and launch him to superstardom. Ghostbusters would also become the first film since Star Wars to capitalize on movie merchandising, as Ghostbusters-themed action figures, proton packs, stickers, cereals, beverages, and more flew off the shelves. Even Coca-Cola, who owned Columbia Pictures at the time, got in on the game.
When you're coming first with a real big thirst, who you gonna call? Ghostbusters!
2 years after his indie horror masterpiece, Halloween, John Carpenter directed The Fog, about a small coastal town invaded by the ghosts of dead sailors from a century-old shipwreck.
Who's there?
The film needed extensive reshoots. In fact, almost a third of The Fog was made up of new footage. And now for the ghost with the most. Tim Burton's beloved classic Beetlejuice is known for its blend of comedy and fantasy, and a memorable performance from Michael Keaton.
Don't you hate it when that happens? Let's go, Barbara.
But the film could have been a lot different. Burton's original choice for the title character was famed singer, comedian, and Rat Pack member Sammy Davis Jr. It's just me, guys. It's fine. It's totally fine. Made for around $300,000, John Carpenter's Halloween eventually grossed $70 million worldwide, making it one of the most successful indie movies of its era. More importantly, Halloween launched Jamie Lee Curtis's career and introduced us to the character of Michael Myers. He has continued to terrorize the people of Haddonfield, Illinois ever since, appearing in a total of 12 films. Filmmaker Sean S. Cunningham was so inspired by Halloween that he decided to make a slasher film of his own. He called it A Long Night at Camp Blood, although that was eventually changed to the much catchier Friday the 13th. The film would go on to launch a highly successful franchise that has had a total of 12 films to date, 8 of which were released in the 1980s. If you want to support our channel, the best way to do that is to head over to 80'semporium.com and buy some of our awesome 80s merch. After the success of Halloween, Hollywood was looking for more horror movies that revolved around a calendar event. Enter Prom Night. Released only 2 months after Friday the 13th, Prom Night aimed to capitalize on the popularity of reigning scream queen and prom queen Jamie Lee Curtis. Continuing with the theme of holiday horror, My Bloody Valentine follows a serial killer who kills people in order to stop them from celebrating Valentine's Day. And frankly, I don't blame him. What if a Cabbage Patch doll came to life and was evil? That was part of the original inspiration behind the 1988 film Child's Play. Director Tom Holland, no, not the Spider-Man Tom Holland, received the job after being recommended to the producer by Steven Spielberg. Writer-director Wes Craven hit it big with Nightmare on Elm Street, a terrifying story about a child murderer who haunts the dreams of teenagers. Can you guess the first studio to show interest in the film? If you said Walt Disney Pictures, you'd be absolutely right. But Disney wanted Craven to tone down the violence, and Craven refused. Instead, he turned to a small new company called New Line Cinema, which would go on to release such films as 2017's It and the Lord of the Rings series. But the studio will always be known as the house that Freddy built.
That's it for part 1 of horror genres of the 1980s. But the frightful fun has just begun. Keep an eye out for part 2, where Jessica will discuss cowboy vampires, werewolves who play basketball, a man who fights his own hand, and more. Be sure to check it out, or else.